Today, we're going to talk about hardware. Now, there's a lot of things that they don't really tell you about hardware, and you just kind of find out the hard way or the long way, or eventually you figure it out. So today I'm going to talk about a whole bunch of stuff that goes into using hardware, especially if you have a bunch of it. Now, the first thing that nobody ever tells you is how hot it is. Every one of these, now I just turned them all on, so obviously they're ice cold, but every one of these pieces of gear, or just about all of them, gets really, really warm. Quite a few of them get hotter than a candle. They would put more heat into the room than a candle. And so when you have like quite a bit, it starts to add up really, really fast. And that makes your air conditioning run nonstop. So you're gonna wanna make sure that you have ample air conditioning if you're gonna end up with a bunch of hardware. Now, when we built this house, there's a separate HVAC here for the entire upstairs, which is all of my studio stuff. And we oversized the HVAC just a little bit just to accommodate for this exact thing. Right now, today, let's see, it's 52 degrees out, and I just turned everything on. Here in an hour or two, the HVAC is gonna kick on. The air conditioning, even though it's only 52 degrees outside. This is something that they don't really talk about. You don't really hear a lot about this. The smaller the room, the more exaggerated the effect is. The more hardware you have, the more exaggerated the effect is. And the more tube gear you have, the more exaggerated the effect is. But because all gear creates heat, this leads me into the next topic. Should you leave space between your pieces of gear for heat dissipation? This is something that a lot of people talk about, and it is pretty widely recommended to leave space between your gear. So why don't I have it? Well, at the end of the day, I need X amount of gear in here to do what I do. And I'm just kind of out of rack space. You can see there's a spot here and there's a spot there, and I've got some spots here and there. But like generally speaking, I don't have a lot of space between all the pieces of hardware, and it's because I don't have enough rack space for it. So is it a good idea to have space between your pieces of rack gear? Absolutely, because all gear gets hot. If you have the rack space available, leave a slot or a half slot between each piece of gear. However, as you acquire more and more hardware, it starts to become more and more difficult to do this because you just start running out of rack space. And so what I did is I figured out which pieces of gear ran the hottest. And those pieces of gear are the ones that I left the space between, and I would move the cooler pieces of gear closer and closer until there's just no more room left. Now, is it detrimental? I have yet to have any issues due to heat with any of my gear. I've never had heat be the reason why something went bad. That doesn't mean that it can't happen. It doesn't mean that it won't happen. But I just gotta make music, and it is what it is. These are all tools to me. Yes, they're wonderful, gooey sounding, incredible tools, but they're just tools to me. They're no different than a hammer is to a carpenter. And so I need X amount of tools stuffed in this room to do what I do, and so it is what it is. But if you have the space, leave a space. Now, while we're talking about mounting hardware and where to mount it in racks, this is a side note of something that I have gotten so much grief for in a whole bunch of videos. I cannot tell you how many people have given me grief for only using top rack screws, because I only use top rack screws in all of my gear, and everyone freaks out every time I show my gear. Everyone's like, why aren't you using rack screws on top and bottom? So here's the deal. You put a piece of gear in there, and the gear always wants to lean back like this. It always wants to tilt down. The rear of the gear wants to tilt down, but it can't because it's being held in place by the top of the rack. This top of the rack can't go any further in because of the rails behind it. So as long as you have a bottom screw in here, then it's perfectly fine. It's not gonna go anywhere. It does not hurt the gear. It does not hurt the racks or the rack rails. It does not put any extra stress on anything. It's purely laziness. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't put 4 screws in your rack gear. It just literally makes no difference. Now, if your racks were getting moved all the time, if it was in road cases, if you were traveling between studios, if it was going in the back of the truck all the time, then yeah, put 4 rack screws in it. But everything sits perfectly stationary at all times in this studio. It makes 0 difference. 2 screws or 4. Now, the next thing that I think people don't really talk about that much is the more hardware you have, the more often something doesn't work, because hardware needs maintenance. And so right now there are 2 pieces of gear in here that need maintenance. And the first one is the Universal Audio 1176. The light is out of the meter. Right now you can see that the light it's not lighting up. It drives me insane because it's supposed to light up. So I got to take that apart. I've got extra bulbs because it's already went out once before. I've got the extra bulbs. So at some point I'll pull it out of the rack, pull the top off of it, and put new bulbs in there. The other one is my TubeTech LCA2B. It's time for an actual service. It needs new tubes. It needs recapped. This thing is... I've had it for almost 15 years, and so it's probably close to 20 years old, and it's just time. It's time for a full service. And so that's something that not a lot of people talk about, is like when you have hardware, like stuff needs maintenance. Tubes need replaced, caps go bad eventually, wiring goes bad. It just happens. And I know this is a giant argument for, well, just use plugins though. But I tell you, I have far more issues with software. I am constantly dealing with, oh, this software needs updated. This software doesn't work. These 2 pieces of software aren't playing nice to each other. So I have more problems with software than I do with hardware. But once you have a good chunk of hardware, there's always something that needs worked on. And that brings us to the next thing, is power. Now, when you have this much hardware, you want to make sure that you have ample power in your room. Now, I have 4 20-amp circuits that feed this particular room. You could probably get away with this much hardware on 2 20-amp circuits, but that's just the amount of power that needs to be consumed. The quality of the power is equally as important. And so what's really important is that you have some power conditioners. No matter what, every single piece of hardware in this room is plugged into a power conditioner. And I've been doing that for decades. For literally decades, every piece of gear runs through a power conditioner, and a power conditioner that has filtration for the power. That's super important. Now, there's a whole bunch of good ones out there, but the main thing is that it has some filtration in it. Furman makes a great one. I've been using these radials here on all of my racks. I have the exact same ones, and they have this LED panel here that like has lights in it. It changes colors, and these are pretty neat, and they're quiet and they work great. So I've been happy with those, but that's the least important part. The important part is that you get a good power conditioner, and your computer and every single piece of hardware should be running off of that power conditioner. Now, the next thing is, do you need a patch bay? And once you have a handful of pieces of gear, yeah, you kind of need a patch bay, especially if you plan on tracking through a piece of gear and also using that same piece of gear when you mix. Because then you're climbing back behind your racks. Depending on how your room is set up, it might be significant, like pretty difficult to climb behind your racks. But then you're climbing behind your racks and unplugging stuff every time you do anything, or you just have a patch bay and you just change everything right here in the patch bay. Now, patch bays can get expensive. Patch cables are expensive. The additional snakes that you need to run patch bays can get expensive, but it's such an important part of the workflow side of being able to move quickly and work fast. Now, I see people all the time ask about TT patch bays, which is what these are. These tiny little, let's see if I can get this to focus here. These tiny little plugs right here are TTs. And you can use those, or you can use TRS patch bays. Now, sonically, there is no difference to me. I literally cannot tell a difference sonically. There's a huge difference in price. The TRS patch bays are significantly cheaper, but I ran those for a long time, and the idea is, generally speaking, that the TRS patch bays are a little bit more or a little bit less durable than the TT patch bays. these plugs feel a lot more solid when you plug them in, and they probably will last a lot longer. That said, I never had a TRS patch bay go bad. Get the one that you can afford. I will say that the TT patch bays, you can fit a lot more points in a single rack space. These are 96 points as opposed to 48 points in a single rack space. So that's another consideration. But if you're gonna use hardware, and especially if you're gonna track and mix through the same pieces, a patch bay really, really helps. Which leads me into cabling. Now, there's a lot of people out there. There's kind of two schools of thought. And the first school is like Mogami or nothing. If you're not using the very best cables that money can buy, then you're giving up all the sonic goodness that you'd have from using hardware. And then there's another whole bunch of people that think it literally doesn't matter, and just as long as it makes a physical connection, who cares? Now, for me personally, I kind of land somewhere in the middle. Expensive cable is great. Like, expensive cables are durable, they last a long time, they feel sturdy. There's certainly some peace of mind that comes, you know, when you buy an expensive cable, there's a peace of mind that comes with that you know you have the best and you're not leaving anything on the table. However, I generally, most of the time, want to land somewhere in the middle. Something like a Proco or a Jumpers, something like that, like all the snakes in this whole studio for every one of the racks. And this giant bundle of snakes that goes all the way around the room, those are all Jumpers. Fantastic bang for buck. Not the most expensive thing out there, incredibly sturdy, sounds totally great. I've done some comparison on cables in the past, and for pro audio equipment, I don't think it's as big of a difference as some people would lead you to believe. I'm not saying it doesn't matter, and when you go into the very cheapest cables, the thing that you're really giving up is durability and longevity. And they're not that much cheaper. It's not like they're a fifth of the price, so you could buy 5 of them for one good cable. It's not like that. And then also, I don't want to deal with downtime. This is a lot of cabling that goes into a bunch of hardware, and I don't want to have to chase down problems. Good, sturdy cables, Switchcraft or Neutrik ends is the standard. Make sure whatever you get has Switchcraft or Neutrik XLRs or 1/4 inches or whatever kind of cable it is. Just make sure they're good ends on them, and you should be fine. But no matter how much hardware you have or how much cabling you have, whether you have a patch bay or not, anytime you need any piece of musical gear, you can pick up that gear from Sweetwater. And I will put links down below to every single piece of gear that I have in this whole studio, and most of those links go to Sweetwater. So anytime you guys need any piece of musical gear, you can jump on any one of my videos, click on any one of the links in the description below, and once you're on the site, you can pick up anything you need. When you do that, it goes a long ways to help me keep making videos just like this. So thank you for using the links in the description anytime you need to purchase anything. Thank you to Sweetwater for sponsoring this video. I hope this was helpful for you. If you have, we should probably talk about recall real quick. This is a pretty simple one. I take photos of every single piece of gear when I'm done with the mix. I make notes in the track in Pro Tools of what gear was used on what track and the order that the gear was in. And then I take the photos, and then it gets saved as in a recall photo in each song. And that's how I just do it with my cell phone, and I just airdrop it to the computer. So that way every song has written and photographic recall of every single piece of gear. I found that this is really fast. This is really easy. As easy as it can be to turn this many knobs back to what they were for every single song. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you. If you have other additional tips, drop them in the comments down below. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.